question that often comes up with game masters, referees, dungeon masters, however you want to term folks, is how to get their players to act in a certain way, how to play the game in a certain way. This can come across as questions such as, how can I get player X to be a better role player? How can I get player Y to speak up more? How can I get player Z to play more with the group? In this video, I want to explain something which I think is fairly important, and that is to let go of these player expectations. I think on a practical level, they're very hard, if not impossible, to force without being really ham-fisted about it. Sure, you could force your players to roleplay, or a particular player in your group to roleplay by literally forcing them to roleplay. But what are you really achieving if you do this? Are you really getting them to be better role players if that's your goal? And of course, we could ask the question, what does being a better role player mean? Is it just someone who role plays more like you want them to? Is it someone who enjoys role playing more? Or are you looking for someone to embrace some kind of role playing for themselves? And these are not even questions that we can really answer, certainly not without taking a particular player into account. Broadly speaking, you're going to have a hard time forcing players to play a certain way. Instead, what you should look to do is letting go of your expectations. Okay, so player A doesn't really like to role play, whatever we're going to call that. Maybe they prefer the combat elements. Maybe they prefer just to watch and take a few actions and just be part of the group. If it's fun for them, that's fine. I try to look for a couple of things with my players. Maybe we should call it my checklist of things I look for. What are my expectations? I really, as I'm thinking about it, or have been thinking about it, I really just have 3 player expectations. 1, show up. Or at least let me know if you're not going to show up. 2, have fun. Are you as the player, or is this player having fun? And this is something that I may have to ask them about. Most players, like most people, they're not looking to get into confrontations with you. They're not looking to be argumentative or hurt somebody's feelings. And someone may meet a group for multiple reasons, and one of those reasons might not be enjoying your game. They might be there because this is where their buddies are. They might be there because they don't want to miss it. They feel like they're part of the group. There's a whole myriad of reasons why someone might be in your game. Their actual enjoyment of playing, maybe who knows where it is on their list. But to the extent that it is knowable and people will tell me, I'd like to try to catch up with folks if it's not clear and obvious. Are you enjoying the game? And then the third one is, are they being disruptive? Are they preventing other players from having a good time? Are they preventing me from having a good time? On the disruptive element, that can take many forms. There are many ways to be disruptive. It could be if you're in a group heavy role players and you have one player who is picking fights at the earliest opportunity, and in doing so forcing the rest of the table to constantly go into combat when they would rather talk it out, find another way, take some other path. But they can never do that because this player is constantly jumping the gun and launching an attack or casting an offensive spell. Even though you would say on the one hand, yeah, this player's just doing what they like, but in this case, doing what they like is disrupting the rest of the party. Then you need to address that. It might simply be that this particular group is not right for them, and that is sometimes what the easiest and best solution is, to be able to, as a GM, look at this player and say, listen, I like you. We may be great friends. You may be an amazing player, but I've got however many other players over here, and you guys are not jibing. So if you can't figure out a way to work and jibe with the group, then maybe this group isn't right for you. And that can be a very difficult conversation to have as a GM. It can be a very difficult conversation to hear as a player, but sometimes it is the right choice. But ultimately, we come down to those 3 elements. Show up, or at least be communicative if you're not going to show up. Have fun, don't be a disruptor. I mentioned just now, disrupting can take many forms. It could also be the ye old player who doesn't get off their phone, player who is not paying attention, player who has their mind in the clouds. There are many ways. When I talk about disrupting, it's when that particular behavior, whatever it is, becomes something that is clearly affecting the rest of the party. One could argue, well, if player X is on their phone, who else cares? Well, the other players may care because they might need to wait on that player if it's in combat and we're always waiting. Everyone else is going in rapid fire order, and there's player Z who always needs to be reminded what to do, maybe needs to be reminded what's on their sheet, so on and so forth. Because they're never paying attention, they're constantly on their phones, that becomes disruptive. If they are someone who there's a subplot that's around, so they need to take center stage in role-playing or at least be active in the decisions, and they constantly have to be woken up out of a stupor or, again, pulled off their phone or something else, then it can become a frustrating play experience. The only way you're going to know if someone is being disruptive is to really listen and hear for it and watch your table, and also to be constantly getting feedback from your players. But outside of those expectations, I don't really try to worry about, is this player the role player, or are they a great role player? And great role player to me, I might see somebody and think, I don't really love the way they role play. Other people may be big fans of it. So who am I to say who is a great role player or who is not? All I can say is they're role playing in a way that I appreciate, or they're role playing in a way that maybe I don't appreciate. Who cares if they like combat? If they like combat, great. There's a fair amount of pretty much any role-playing game you're going to play, or at least most of them, certainly the most popular ones, that has combat in it. That's certainly not a poor quality to have, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with it also if they just want to be the tag-along. That's perfectly fine. I usually think that a good mix is beneficial to the table. It's totally okay if some folks want to just take the back seat, be led along, and they'll have their moments where they feel strongly about an issue and they'll speak up or make an action, and it'll feel big. Quiet John just stepped up, and wow, isn't that a great moment? Sure, because that Quiet John is usually quiet. Ultimately, you want to think about if you have some checklist of this is what I want my players to be, X, Y, or Z, or how to act A, B, or C. I think you really need to evaluate what it is that is really you are looking for, because I think what you're really doing is imprinting things that perhaps you want on your game. If you want to be the master storyteller and you feel like the players aren't getting your story enough, are you imprinting maybe a fault or a weakness or something you are missing or not adapting for your party? Are you pushing that onto them? Maybe you're not surfacing a story in a way that's interesting to your players, but instead of looking at that and thinking about how can I do this better, you were saying I need players who are more interested. They are doing something wrong. If you are looking at players who maybe are not interested in combat, but you're throwing a lot of combat on them, instead of thinking about, boy, I need my players to get more into combat, maybe you should think about, maybe they just don't like combat that much, and I should try to think about what things they are interested in. As a game, right, we're playing a bunch of people at a table. Sure, one of us is the game master, the other ones are called players, but we're all players, we're all there to have fun. Make sure that when you are thinking about what you want out of your players, that you are taking into account the fact that you are a player, and not only does that mean that you have rights to have fun like everybody else, but you also have to fit into that group the same way as everybody else. And make sure that you are not just trying to push your own personal agenda onto your players, especially if you get into the game and those agendas are not matching up. And of course, like I'm sure folks are already thinking, this is great stuff to cover if and when you have a session 0 before your campaign even begins. Lay out your expectations. Lay out the kind of things that you want. If you do know off the bat, I want a very role-playing heavy campaign. There's not going to be a lot of combat. There's going to be a lot of socializing. I expect players to get into the intrigue, dive into it, become absorbed with that stuff. Make sure that's out there as soon as possible. That is session 0. That is part of your campaign pitch. We are playing an intrigue adventure, an intrigue campaign. Highly political, highly social, very little combat. Make sure everybody knows that stuff right off the bat. And by the way, having that session 0 doesn't really absolve you of your responsibilities. What session 0 is, you're trying to get everybody on the same page. But as your game evolves, you have to keep resetting that expectation. Don't be afraid to call a session 0, call it a timeout, call it a halftime after multiple sessions to reset and say, hey, remember, this is what the game is, especially if things have moved a little bit, if there's been changing in the guard, if the group has shifted, or you just notice things are shifting, or maybe you in your own mind is shifting. Well, I really wanted intrigue, but it's kind of turning into a war campaign with a lot of battles. I'm really digging it, but that's not what I sold the players. So let me go back and make sure this is what everybody wants. And if they don't want it, maybe we can figure out different ways to handle it or work on the intrigue elements inside this war scenario versus fighting out all the battles. The other thing to be aware of is just because your players say what they want or say even what kind of player they are, they oftentimes may have a different opinion of their own play, just like you have a different opinion of how you GM versus how your players may see you. They're going to have their own internal impressions of, boy, I am a great role player, even though it may not be role playing to your style. So even though they may sign off and say to you, yes, I love playing, I consider myself a great role player, it may not be a role player to your taste. Same thing with any other element you may ask them. You may get folks who really want to play the game. Maybe they think that, well, I'm not a big role player, but I think it's going to grow on me, so I'm going to do it. And then it doesn't grow on them. Or they end up not liking it. Or they just end up not having a great self-evaluation. They thought they loved role-playing, but the reality is they don't. So you really have to constantly check up on it, keep up on these things. But ultimately, I think what you want is just a very baseline expectation, which I think mine are, right? Show up, have fun, don't be disruptive. That's all I try to look for in my players. And if I get a bunch of stuff beyond that, if I think, boy, I really love when the players get into intrigue and I see my players doing it, then hey, thumbs up to me. I'm super excited. But I am not saying they're supposed to, and I'm certainly not judging them as falling short of some expectation if they decide to leave intrigue on the side. But to do this, you kind of need to know yourself. You need to know what you're getting into, and you have to be able to let go and just accept whatever things that different players come to the table. Because everyone's going to bring a different energy, different ideas, different play styles, different everything. Their own character, their player character's character, right? Everything is going to come. So just take it as it comes. If you do have some things you really are looking for, make sure you are extremely upfront with your players. Make sure you are checking and rechecking and reassessing and reestablishing over time. And just make sure that ultimately you get players, and including yourself in that, who enjoy the type of game that you're playing, are having fun, and aren't stopping anyone else from having fun. And once you've gotten that, I think you've got everything you need. Embrace everything else. That's all I got. Game on. I'll talk to you later.
Hexed.